Hello everyone, this is Jessica with Black Travelers Network. This story is a good story and it deals with the used clothes market. Hopefully by the end of listening to this story, you will have learned a lot more than what you ever really knew was happening in the world of fashion and clothing. Before I go any further and get into the article, I want to encourage you to take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever new videos are posted. Because this story is actually part one of two parts dealing with the used clothes industry. This is really fascinating, and I really hope that those of you who are listening are going to have something new and different to take away, because what happens here in America is annually, sometimes several times in a year, many of us, we go through our closets and we round up all of our old clothes, and some of our best stuff, we may pass it down to somebody in our family. But more often than not, we tend to take a lot of our used clothes to places like the Salvation Army. There are these big recycle bins that sometimes can be found in different grocery store lots in different parts of the country. So a lot of us do our part in donating our used garments to hopefully help someone who may be less fortunate or who may need new clothing. And for us, it's a charitable donation as well as an opportunity to do what oftentimes we say is spring cleaning, or just getting rid of some of the things that we know we no longer want and probably won't ever wear again. And so the timing of this article is appropriate. I want you to tune in. It comes to us from bbc.com. The title of the article is Used Clothes. Why is worldwide demand declining? The rise of fast fashion retailers has meant that consumers can buy trendy clothes almost the second they're designed and just as quickly move on to the next fad. Most of us try to lessen the guilt of our fashion fickleness by dropping those barely worn clothes off at a charity shop. According to Oxfam, donations to its store increased 2% in the past year alone. In many ways, it's a virtuous cycle, but only 10 to 20% of donated clothes are actually sold through charity shops like Oxfam's. The rest are sold to distributors who then sort the clothes and send them on to countries like Pakistan or Malaysia, where they are sold in secondhand clothes markets or recycled to make products like fleece. There's just one problem. Those countries increasingly no longer want our used clothes. Downward trend. Overall, the global export market for worn and used clothing is estimated to be about $4 billion. But a BBC analyst of data for the United States shows that the formerly fast-growing used clothes import-export business has declined over the past few years, both in terms of volume and in terms of value. Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and Burundi recently announced they intend to stop importing used clothes from places like the UK and the United States by 2019. Last June, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame said, quote, "We have to grow and establish our industries." End quote. The consequences for clothes-selling countries were swift. The United States, which is the world's biggest exporter of worn clothing, said over the summer it would review its trade relationship with Rwanda, as well as Uganda and Tanzania, in the wake of the proposed bans. In a statement, it said the bans, quote, imposed significant economic hardship on the U.S. used clothing industry, end quote. Whether it's due to political bickering or simply a lack of demand, the increasingly competitive global market for worn clothing has put pressure on the UK companies that buy all those unsold charity shop clothes. Not many left. Ross Berry's family started and has run LMB textile recyclers for the past 30 years. But now he says there are, quote, not that many of us left in the UK, end quote. Their factory in East London has massive conveyor belts with workers dotted every few feet or so, carefully inspecting all of our unwanted cast-offs into 160 different possible grades of clothing. The grades range from barely worn to only good for insulation. Each grade is packed up into plastic sacks weighing 45 kilograms that are then sold for anything from £5 to $150 to foreign buyers. Bras and football kit go for the most, Mr. Berry says. The sorting is quite a labor-intensive process. Quote, there's not a machine that will tell you that's a grade 1 hoodie, end quote. He tells me as 10 workers sort through the latest truckload. He says that over the past 5 years, he's seen 60 or 70 companies stop their sorting business, and LMB hasn't been immune. He says he had to trim his staff from nearly 120 workers to some 20 today. Quote, clothing is an international trade. They can buy from anywhere, end quote, says Mr. Berry, who says it's hard to remain competitive when labor costs in the UK are quite high. Part of what is hurting Mr. Berry's business is the fact that most of the clothing we buy today is increasingly being sorted into the lower junk category. Things fall apart. Manufacturers know that customers are more interested in low prices than durability because they increasingly expect to wear their clothes just a few times and throw them away. So the quality is not as good. So when our customers get an item, they're not getting 200 or 300 wears out of it. They know it's only going to be a couple of uses, he says. That means, according to Fee Gilfeather, head of marketing for Oxfam's trading division, quote, more clothing is getting incinerated than there used to be, end quote. Which is why both Oxfam and LMB says the future of clothing recycling might be, quote, closing the clothing loop, end quote. Figuring out a way to fully recycle these clothes into fabrics we might use. Oxfam recently joined Mark and Spencer to manufacture a suit for the high-quality used cashmere from the high-quality used cashmere that gets donated to its stores. And fast fashion behemoth Heinz and Moritz, better known as H&M, recently linked with the Hong Kong Institute of Textiles and Apparel to fund research into how to recycle blended textiles such as cotton, polyester mixes into new fabrics and yarns. Yet until technology can catch up with our insatiable need for ever more fast fashion, one message Oxfam emphasizes is that consumers shouldn't stop donating simply because it is forced to burn more clothing. In fact, some of the energy from those unwanted clothing fires could end up powering homes. So the next time you're tempted by a new trend, it might be wise to remember the words of Coco Chanel, quote, elegance, she reported as saying, does not necessarily consist in putting on a new dress, end quote. And so that's the end of the article. And it's very fascinating because, as I said before, not many people know how valuable those tattered clothings actually can be. It's one of those situations where we give and we give, but we have no idea. I was actually on a trip to South Africa, and one thing that I found extremely interesting, because there was this news-like show that was on the television, and I think it was like called Asia Today or something like that, and they talked about the used clothing market, and they literally tracked the process that the used clothing goes to and what happens when the clothing arrives in Malaysia. And they like filmed all of these clothes being sorted by color, by quality. They even showed how the clothing went through the whole process, and how they were able to develop yarn out of these pieces of clothing that we just donate and give away, because they really have this sort of waste nothing mentality. And that's something that, again, I felt was very interesting, because it's not something that we really talk about today. And just to know that they are literally spending money on the things that we throw away, and it never gets talked about. And just to kind of put it in perspective, I want to say that they mentioned that in the article, it says a plastic sack weighing 45 kilos can go for anywhere from 5 pounds to 150. So let's do some quick math. 5 pounds in the United Kingdom is roughly about 5 pounds in the UK is roughly, let me do some quick conversions. 5 pounds is roughly about $7 and 150 pounds is roughly about $212. And so they're talking about a sack that could weigh about 45 kilograms, and 45 kilograms is about 99 pounds, so roughly about 100 pounds. So you can get roughly about 100 pounds worth of used clothing they sell for anywhere from $7 to a little over $212 on the market. So again, this is part one. I'm going to do a second part that's going to dig a little bit deeper and show you the international politics that are at play. I think the point is that if you look at it from an economic standpoint and what the East African countries are actually doing by standing together and saying, no, we're going to put a ban on used clothing entering our country, that's a very big, bold move. And so I hope you will tune in and stay on this journey as I go a little bit deeper in talking about the used clothes market. So again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave your comments below. What are your thoughts? Did you know that there was a big market for used clothing around the world? I mean, it's $1 billion business, and the United States exports millions of dollars. Probably, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of over $500 million of used clothing, the things that we throw away. The United States actually exports it. So did you know that? What do you think now, having found that out? Make it a point to leave your comments below. And one more thing, don't forget, we do have an upcoming trip to Rwanda. We're talking about the East African countries, and we are visiting East Africa this June, from June 1st to June 9th. We will be there. You can get an up close look at what's happening, what's going on in the beautiful country of Rwanda. And I'd love to have you come out if you want to join this trip. Details are below. You can check it out, and if you have any questions, definitely send us an email and we will answer whatever questions you may have. Thank you guys for listening, and tune in to part 2.